When King of Kings Orodes II heard about the turmoil in Syria, he began assembling an army. By the end of 41 BCE, 20,000 troops, led by Pacorus and Labienus, were ready to face the Romans. In the spring of 40 BCE, the Parthians crossed the Euphrates. Many Roman officers and the soldiers under their command joined the Parthians, because these officers had previously served under Brutus and Cassius. They knew Labienus well, and when they saw him fighting alongside the Parthians, they decided to join him. The Parthian cavalry advanced easily as far as the city of Apamea, with cities surrendering one by one. However, in Apamea, some Roman forces under Saxa resisted. Labienus, along with some Roman troops under his command, attacked Saxa's forces but had no success. That night, Labienus ordered his soldiers to throw letters into the Roman camp, urging them to join him. Fearing betrayal by his own troops, Saxa withdrew to Antioch. Once the Parthians learned of the Roman retreat, they immediately pursued Saxa's forces. Near Antioch, the Parthian vanguard caught up to the Roman rear guard, triggering a brief clash. The Parthians inflicted heavy losses, forcing the Romans to take refuge behind Antioch's walls. Saxa, unsure of his troops' loyalty, fled again under cover of darkness, leaving Antioch to be captured by the Parthians. They continued chasing the fleeing Romans, eventually trapping Saxa in Cilicia. Unfortunately, sources do not give us details of the battle that happened between the two sides. What is clear is that the Parthians, after a tough fight, managed to kill Saxa in the middle of the battle and destroy his army. The Parthians placed the captured Roman standards alongside those they had seized in the Battle of Carrhae, delivering another blow to Roman prestige. With the destruction of Rome's main force in the region, the Parthians followed their original plan and split their army in two. Labienus, along with the Romans who had joined him, was tasked with capturing Asia Minor. Pacorus, with his Parthian cavalry, marched towards Syria and Palestine to bring those areas under Parthian control. Meanwhile, a part of the Parthian cavalry, led by Pharnapates, was stationed at the Amanus Pass to serve as a reserve force. Pacorus took all of Syria without much difficulty. Only the city of Tyre managed to stay out of Parthian control. The Parthians continued advancing, and by the end of 40 BCE, they entered Jerusalem, warmly welcomed by the Jewish population. Pacorus removed Hyrcanus, the Roman governor of the city, from his position and replaced him with his brother Aristobulus, who favored the Parthians. At the same time, an envoy from the small Nabatean kingdom arrived at Pacorus's court, offering lavish gifts to the Iranian prince. Meanwhile, on the other side of the war, Labienus launched a swift attack on Anatolia. By the end of 40 BCE, he had crushed the Roman forces there and taken Cilicia, Carrhae, Lydia, and Ionia. At this point, the Parthian realm resembled the vast Achaemenid Empire of old. News of these successful Parthian campaigns woke Mark Antony from his complacency. He quickly raised an army and set out for Palestine to confront the Parthians. But then, he received word from his wife and brother about unrest in Italy. To smooth things over with Octavian, Antony postponed his campaign against the Parthians and rushed back to Italy. Fortunately for Antony, his wife Fulvia, who had caused much of Octavian's displeasure, died of natural causes. Antony then married Octavian's sister, easing tensions between the two Roman leaders. Soon after, Antony and Octavian regained control of Sicily, which had long been in the hands of Pompey's sons. After these successes, Antony moved to Greece and sent his general, Publius Ventidius, eastward to battle the Parthians. In 39 BCE, Ventidius and his forces entered Asia. When Labienus learned of Ventidius's approach, he immediately decided to withdraw and sent word for reinforcements from the troops stationed at the Amanus Pass. Ventidius pursued Labienus with his lightest forces and finally caught up with him near the Gates of Cilicia. In 39 BCE, Ventidius caught up with Labienus's forces at a place called the Gates of Cilicia. Both sides set up camp and waited for reinforcements to arrive. Ventidius positioned his camp at the base of the Taurus Mountains, while Labienus pitched his camp in the lower foothills. Later that day, each side's reinforcements arrived. The Parthian cavalry, under the command of Pharnapates, joined Labienus's camp and suggested attacking the Romans at daybreak. Labienus rejected the plan and urged caution. However, the Parthian officers, emboldened by their previous victories, were unwilling to wait. At sunrise, the Parthians offered their greetings and prayers to Mithra, then marched their forces out of camp, forming a battle line at the foot of the mountain. Pharnapates ordered his lightly armed riders to spread out more than usual and to retreat if the Romans advanced. He then positioned his heavily armored cavalry in tight formation behind them. Hearing Parthian drums and war horns, the Romans woke up to see Parthian troops ready for battle at the foot of the mountain. Their commander ordered the soldiers out of camp but kept them on higher ground, knowing that fighting Parthians on lower ground would be deadly. Ventidius stationed his cavalry on the flanks, placed the legionaries in the center, and positioned his light troops, including javelin throwers, behind them. The Romans had no intention of giving up their strong position and going down to face the Parthians on the plain. Pharnapates took this as a sign of weakness and, trusting his own strength, ordered the attack. Without waiting for Labienus to join them, the Parthian cavalry charged up the slope toward the Roman forces, raining arrows down on them. Meanwhile, Pharnapates instructed his heavy cavalry in the rear to move forward slowly and take positions on the wings, ready to smash into the Romans if needed. Although the legionaries crouched behind their shields, Parthian arrows pierced right through them, pinning the Romans to the ground. Ventidius urged his men to stand firm and not lose heart. The Parthians climbed the hill and got close to the Roman lines, but the Romans stayed put. Ventidius then ordered his javelin throwers to target the Parthians' front ranks. Once most of the Parthians were on the slope, Ventidius signaled his legionaries to attack. The Parthian front line, trying to fall back, collided with the ranks behind them, sparking chaos. Caught in a tangle, they couldn't escape fast enough, allowing the Roman legionaries to reach the lightly armed Parthian riders, who, lacking proper close combat gear, were cut down by the Romans. Seeing the disaster, Pharnapates commanded a retreat before his heavy cavalry got pulled in. At the sound of the retreat horns, the Parthians realized they had lost. Fear overwhelmed them, and they fled in complete disarray. Instead of linking up with Labienus, they rushed towards Syria, leaving him isolated. Ventidius chased them, but when he saw Labienus's forces ready for battle, he halted. The flight of the Parthians also shattered the morale of Labienus's troops, who were in no condition to fight. Even so, Labienus refused to show weakness and held his position. As darkness fell, both sides led their forces back to camp. With the Parthian cavalry no longer a threat, Ventidius set up his camp close to Labienus's to keep an eye on him. Knowing he would lose if he fought Ventidius, Labienus tried to slip away under cover of night. Taking his best soldiers, he prepared to retreat, leaving the rest behind. Seeing that resistance was useless, the men Labienus left behind deserted the camp in small groups and went over to Ventidius. They revealed Labienus's plan to him. Labienus and his close companions had barely left camp when Ventidius attacked. Many of Labienus's followers were slaughtered, but Labienus himself managed to escape. After killing those left with Labienus, Ventidius stormed Labienus's camp that same night. He killed all remaining forces but couldn't find Labienus. By winning this victory, Ventidius brought Cilicia and Asia Minor back under Roman control. He stayed in Cilicia for a while to restore order and hunt for Labienus, who had escaped the battlefield. Labienus managed to hide for a time, but was eventually executed for treason. Ventidius appointed his commander, Pompeidius Silo, to lead the cavalry and march toward Pharnapates, who was stationed at the Amanus Pass. Ventidius himself soon took the rest of his forces towards Syria. After his disastrous mistakes at the Gates of Cilicia, Pharnapates regrouped the surviving Parthians at the Amanus Pass, a narrow and well-fortified route that was ideal for holding off the Romans. Determined to erase the shame of his earlier defeat, Pharnapates hoped to turn the tide with a victory in this location. It wasn't long before the Roman cavalry, commanded by Silo, entered the pass. Pharnapates lined up his heavily armored horsemen and charged at the Romans, supported by mounted archers. A fierce battle broke out. The well-equipped Parthian heavy cavalry slowly pushed the Romans back and nearly annihilated them. Just then, Ventidius arrived with the main Roman force. He rushed to support his cavalry and drove the Parthians back. According to Cassius Dio, had Ventidius arrived even a little later, the Roman riders would have been completely destroyed. The clash between the two sides grew ever more intense. Resolute in his refusal to endure another defeat, Pharnapates chose to fight to the death rather than retreat. Upon his fall, the Parthian forces withdrew from the battlefield. When Pacorus heard that the Romans had passed the Amanus Pass, he led his forces out of Syria to regroup in Mesopotamia and spend the winter behind his own borders. With the Parthians in retreat, Ventidius easily brought Syria back under Roman control. He imposed steep tributes on anyone who had helped the Parthians and punished them severely. Ventidius was eager to stamp out anti-Roman sentiment as quickly as possible, especially since another Parthian attack remained a possibility. Pacorus spent the winter in Mesopotamia, raising new forces until he had 20,000 horsemen, most of them unusually heavily armored riders. In the spring of 38 BCE, Pacorus broke camp and headed towards Syria. Ventidius, who still hadn't fully contained the anti-Roman mood in Syria, wasn't yet ready to face the Parthians, especially as his troops were scattered in their winter quarters. He knew that if the Parthians took the short route via the city of Zeugma, they would quickly reach the Roman forces and defeat him. But if they opted for a longer route downstream, Ventidius would have enough time to gather his men. Using a clever ruse, Ventidius fed the Parthians false information, buying himself the time he needed. Misled by these reports, Pacorus chose the longer route, delaying his entry into Syria by 40 days. On June 9th, 38 BCE, coincidentally, the anniversary of the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthian cavalry, led by their prince, advanced unhindered as far as the city of Gindarus. There, they found Roman legionaries encamped on the hills. Pacorus interpreted Rome's apparent inaction, allowing Parthian troops to cross the Euphrates and move deep into Roman territory unopposed, as a sign that Ventidius's forces must be weak. Learning little from past encounters, he prepared his men to attack the Romans on the heights. He placed his lightly armed cavalry in the front line and drew up his heavily armored riders behind them. On the Roman side, Ventidius didn't even bother to bring his own soldiers out of camp, acting as if he couldn't see the Parthian cavalry approaching. Once Pacorus had set his ranks in order, he ordered his light horse archers to climb the slope and engage the Romans. As these skilled archers approached, they released a hail of arrows on the Roman positions. Pacorus moved his heavy cavalry a bit closer in case he needed to support his forward riders. The swift Parthian horsemen made it all the way to the walls of the Roman camp without meeting any real resistance. Suddenly, a trumpet sounded. Roman cavalry, previously hidden behind the camp, charged the Parthians, and at the same time, the gates of the camp swung open. Well-prepared legionaries poured out at speed. Panic spread among the Parthian lines. Their frontline riders, trying to fall back, collided with those behind them, causing total confusion. The Romans quickly cut down many of the Parthian light cavalry, who were ill-prepared for close combat. Some managed to flee, while the rest were struck down. The Romans pursued them until they spotted the Parthian heavy cavalry waiting farther down the slope. There, they halted. Pacorus rallied his heavily armored horsemen and launched a charge. Ventidius, meanwhile, ordered his slingers to open fire. Many heavily armored Parthians were struck in the head and face by the stones. Their charge up the slope was less effective than they had hoped, and the Romans held their lines, inflicting further losses on the attacking cavalry with the slingers' bombardment. Still, the brave Parthians did not lose heart and kept fighting hard. It was at this critical moment that Pacorus, the young Parthian prince, was struck down, most likely by repeated blows from the Roman slingers. News of the prince's death spread fear among his men. Seeing no hope left, they began to retreat, leaving only the prince's personal guards to defend him until the bitter end. Ventidius ordered his troops to chase down the fleeing Parthians. He caught up with some of them as they tried to cross the Euphrates, ending many more lives. This disaster at Gindarus came to a close with large numbers of Parthians dead, including their young prince. After the battle, Ventidius had Pacorus's head placed on a spear. By displaying it throughout various cities in Syria, Rome crushed local resistance and firmly re-established its authority in the region. With Syria pacified, Ventidius decided to push the Parthians back even more. He led his army to the city of Samosata, the capital of the kingdom of Commagene, and placed it under siege. Meanwhile, Mark Antony arrived in Asia, took over leadership of the siege in person, and relieved Ventidius of his command. Antiochus, the king of Commagene, sent envoys bearing gifts to the Romans and offered to surrender, but Antony dismissed them and continued the siege. Eventually, he overcame the city's defenders after a lengthy blockade. Only then did he accept a sizable payment from Antiochus and allow him to remain as ruler. With Commagene now subdued, the moment seemed right for the Romans to deal with the Parthians once and for all. Antony ordered the assembling of a massive army to conquer the Parthian Empire. Though this chapter has concluded, there is still much more to tell about the First Roman-Parthian War. So be sure to subscribe to stay updated on future episodes of this series.